There's something about the Appalachian Mountains that holds on to things. Fog, secrets, and screams. Tonight, we're diving into 9 chilling true stories from people who set out for a quiet camping trip and came back haunted by what they saw or heard in those woods. These are the kinds of tales you whisper around a fire, hoping they aren't true. But they are. If you're brave enough to keep watching, make sure to like this video. Your support helps us bring more terrifying stories to horror fans just like you. And if you're part of our horror family, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Finally, if you haven't already, hit subscribe. It's the biggest way you can help creepy souls stay alive and stay scary. I don't usually do backwoods camping. Not because I'm afraid of the woods or anything. I grew up in western North Carolina, running through rhododendron thickets and listening to whip-poor-wills call at dusk. But these deep spots, the ones past the marked trails where the forest seems to lean in and the silence turns heavy, I always gave those places a little more respect. But my buddy Ian had been itching to get off the grid for a while. Said he found an old civilian conservation corpse trail out near Raven Cliffs, barely used, not even listed on all trails. Whole ridge to ourselves, he told me, grinning like it was a selling point. Against my better judgment, I said yes. The hike in took most of the afternoon. The forest felt too quiet, not in a peaceful way, but like everything was holding its breath. Trees grew too close together. Moss clung to the rocks like old skin, and every few hundred feet we'd pass rotting fence posts or half-buried bricks that didn't match the earth. Old stuff. Forgotten. We found a flat patch near a slope just shy of a dried-up creek bed. No cell signal, no voices, just us, a small tent, and the distant groan of wind up the valley. We made a fire and sat in the dirt, boots off, watching sparks drift into the dark. I don't know what time it was when the breathing started. The fire had burned low, just red and orange coals. Ian was finishing off a protein bar. I remember scratching at a mosquito bite on my wrist when I noticed it. Slow, steady, deliberate. Breathing. It wasn't wind. I know what wind sounds like moving through trees. This was different. It had rhythm, depth, like someone trying not to be heard, but still standing too close. I sat still, not sure if it was just my head playing games. My ears rang from the silence like they do in deep woods at night. Then Ian whispered, "Do you hear that too?" And everything in me clenched. We didn't move, didn't speak after that. Just listened. The sound circled us, always behind the trees, always just out of view. No footsteps, no snapping twigs, just breathing, low and wet like through a congested nose. At one point it came upwind of the fire. I should have smelled something if it was a bear or a person, but the air was still, just pine and ash. Nothing else. Ian reached for his flashlight, and I grabbed his wrist. We didn't turn it on. Somehow that felt worse. Like light would force whatever was out there to notice us, to act. It kept going. Hours, maybe. It would stop for a while, then start again from another spot, closer. When dawn finally touched the tops of the trees, there was nothing. No sound, no sign of anyone ever being there but us. But I swear, I didn't sleep a second, and neither did Ian. We packed up fast that morning. Didn't say much, just stuffed the tent, killed the coals, and hiked out with that dead weight in our guts, like something had brushed against our minds and left a cold smear behind. About a mile from camp, we found something we hadn't seen the day before. There was a clearing, flat, with an old CCC stone marker crumbled in half. Behind it, maybe 30 yards in, we saw what looked like a cellar door half swallowed by roots and dirt. Wooden planks rotted through, iron hinges rusted so badly they flaked when Ian brushed them. We should have left it alone, but something about the way it sat there like it didn't want to be seen gnawed at us. Inside was dark. Dirt floor. Smelled like wet paper and mold. Just a single room, maybe 8 feet wide. Crude wooden shelves, some broken. A mattress in one corner. Nothing but rusted coils and damp stuffing. And against the back wall, etched in the dirt with a stick, were markings, circles, lines, slashes, No clear pattern, just carved over and over again like someone trying to remember something. They couldn't quite grasp. The breathing came back when we stepped inside. Not from outside this time. It was faint, but there, echoing like it had been recorded and left looping inside the walls. I looked at Ian. He was pale, sweating despite the cold. He didn't move. Neither did I. There was no source, no speaker, no air ducts, just dirt and silence and that awful, deliberate sound. Low, damp, tired breathing like it had been going on for years and was just waiting for someone to hear it again. We left. Didn't speak the whole hike back. Weeks passed before we talked about it. And even then, we didn't say much. Just enough to know we both heard it, felt it, knew it was real. A month later, Ian messaged me a photo. Black and white, blurry. It was clipped from a local newspaper archive, 1953. 2 CCC workers had gone missing near that trail. Their last known shelter was a root cellar built during the flood mitigation projects. They were never found, but the article said something that stuck with me. Fellow workers described one of the missing men as prone to sleepwalking and episodes of disorientation, often waking in unfamiliar spots, unable to explain how he got there. He had once claimed, quote, "Sometimes at night I hear myself breathing, but I'm not the one doing it. I haven't gone back. Won't. Sometimes, though, especially on quiet nights when I forget to turn the TV on, I think I hear it again, just beneath the silence. Breathing, still circling, still waiting." I hadn't been back to North Carolina in years, not since my dad passed and left the house to my brother. We were never close, not in the emotional sense. But when Ian texted me about taking a weekend trip, just a short 2-nighter out near Whiteside, I figured why not? A chance to reset, get some mountain air, feel something again. We drove up Friday morning. The air thickened as we climbed the ridge, that familiar Appalachian dampness curling in through the vents. Mossy switchbacks, rock cuts, and fog crawling like fingers across the gravel pull-offs. The kind of drive where the silence in the car says more than any playlist could. We parked at an old trailhead maybe half a mile past the last marked access point. Not even a real lot, just a rutted clearing off a dirt spur. The path we followed up wasn't on Ian's GPS, but he insisted. He'd found it on an old CCC map for him. Said it followed the original trail line from the 30s before they rerouted it. The hike was steady, switchbacks along a high ridge, with drops off one side and gnarled rhododendron tunnels on the other. We set up camp near the crest, a flat, overgrown shelf with a partial view of the cliff drop through the trees. As night settled, the quiet was heavy. Not peaceful, just still, too still. Even the crickets were soft, like they didn't want to be noticed. We built a small fire, boiled water for freeze-dried chili, talked a little about work, old classmates. Nothing deep, just the kind of loose conversation that starts to fade when the fire dies low and the cold comes in off the valley. That's when I saw it. A marking, etched into the bark of a tree about 10 feet behind our tent. Long vertical lines crossed with short diagonals. At first I thought it was initials, but up close it didn't look like letters. More like crude runes, something you'd find in a book on folk rituals. Fresh, too. The bark around it was still sticky. Bits of wood curled at the edges like it had been done that day. I showed Ian. He squinted, then laughed it off. Local kids. Probably saw the Blair Witch last weekend. I tried to laugh too, I really did. But something about it, how the marks felt. Intentional. Repeated. Not playful, and too clean to be random. We found 3 more before turning in, one on a birch to the east, one lower, carved into a rotting log like someone got tired and sat, another just beyond the fire ring. I laid in the tent that night staring at the nylon roof above me, listening. The wind barely moved. Trees creaked in long, slow arcs. Something about the way the firelight flickered against those carved trunks made it feel like they were circling us. I woke up around 4 a.m. to take a piss. Stepped out, boots crunching frost. the cold biting up through my sleeves. That's when I saw the new carving, not 10 feet from the tent, still damp, still curling at the edges, and above it, above where I stood, a faint line traced in the bark above my head, right on the tree that hung directly over us while we slept. We packed early. Neither of us said it outright, but the tension had taken hold. The carvings weren't just odd anymore, they were everywhere, every single tree. Within 100 feet of our camp, the same marks had spread like a rash, some deep and jagged, others faint, almost polite. But they all followed the same pattern, same spacing, same angles, always vertical strokes broken by short slashes, not random, not thoughtless. Ian stopped by one that hadn't been there the day before. This one wasn't here last night, I swear. He was right. It was etched into a pine that had stood just beyond our view, maybe 20 paces down toward the trail. Fresh shavings at the base, sap beating along the groove. And just below it, wedged into a knothole, was a small, rounded pebble. Red. Polished. Out of place. I didn't touch it. We started the hike back, but the forest didn't feel like the one we came up through. The trail was the same, technically, but things looked different. Fallen logs we didn't remember. A sagging fence post half swallowed by the hill. And more of those marks, appearing on trees far too wide to carve without effort. Do you think someone came through in the night? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Ian didn't answer. He just kept walking faster than before. When we reached the clearing where we'd parked, my gut twisted. The passenger side door of my car was slightly ajar. Not wide, just enough. Inside, the glove box was open, the contents untouched except for a single trail map laid on top of my registration. It wasn't mine, different paper, older print, a CCC stamp on the corner. But someone had circled a spot in red ink, our ridge, and next to it, in neat, blocky writing, marked now. That night, back at my apartment in Asheville, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the red pebble, about how clean the markings were, about how none of them looked rushed, like whoever made them had time. Like they watched us sleep. Weeks passed. Ian stopped replying to messages, said he was just busy. Eventually, I stopped trying. But here's the thing that still wakes me up sometimes: sweating. About a month after we got back, I took my car in for an oil change. When I picked it up, the mechanic handed me something he found tucked into the seam. Behind the spare tire, a pebble. Small, rounded, polished, red. I didn't tell him it wasn't mine, didn't say a word, just nodded. Took it home, and buried it. But sometimes, when I park under trees, I swear I see faint slashes on the bark above, my windshield vertical, followed by short diagonal lines, and I wonder how long it takes for something like that to spread. I'd done plenty of backpacking before, not exactly hardcore survival stuff, but enough to know what I was doing, enough to not get turned around or spooked by every cracked twig. This trip was supposed to be a reset, a loop trail that started near the Cherokee National Forest, right along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. 4 days. Just me and my friend Will. We took the long route, winding through high ridges and saddleback hollows, mostly staying off the popular spurs. Will liked the quiet, said it helped him think. I wasn't sure what he needed to think about, and I didn't ask. By the third night, we'd put in around 20 miles, found a shelf overlooking a low ravine, soft pine needles underfoot, decent tree cover, no sign of other hikers. It was just after dusk when I spotted the second fire, faint, way off across the hollow. A flicker through the trunks, maybe half a mile downhill. One figure sat by it, hunched low like they were warming their hands. I waved, just being polite. The figure didn't react, didn't even shift. Will looked, then shrugged. Probably someone local, he muttered. Old-timer or off-grid type. Wasn't uncommon out here. Folks with cabins tucked in, people who didn't want company. Still, something about how the fire never seemed to move. Never flared, never dimmed, kept drawing my eye. We ate quietly. Ramen and jerky. I set our small stash of firewood in a pile under the tarp, maybe 10 feet from the tent. The night settled, deep and cold. Wind rustled dry leaves high in the poplars. We zipped up our bags and listened to the woods grow still. It must have been past midnight when I woke up needing to pee. I stepped outside, boots on but no flashlight, just letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Our fire was dying to embers. Mist hovered along the ground, curling like steam. I glanced toward the hollow, expecting the other fire to be out by now. It wasn't. Still burning. Still the same figure, still unmoving. Back in the tent, I didn't sleep much. Something about the air felt thick, not like fog, more like pressure, a low weight sitting on my chest. When dawn finally cracked the tree line, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The firewood was gone, not scattered, not half-used, just gone. Cleaned out like someone scooped it up carefully, quietly, in the middle of the night. Will cursed under his breath, rubbing his eyes. We checked the camp for tracks, but the ground was mostly dry, nothing but faint, dents here and there. Then I noticed the wet prints, bare feet, adult-sized, coming from the woods, toes pointing toward our tent. They stopped about 3 feet from the nylon, turned slightly, then led away, back toward the ravine, back toward the still burning fire, still hunched, still watching. We didn't say much that morning, just packed fast, faster than I think either of us realized. Our trail was supposed to loop around and bring us back to the ridge from a lower elevation, but Will pushed to cut a new route, one that took us up and away instead. The figure never moved. We checked every few minutes as we hiked. That fire, dim but constant, sat like an eye between the trees, always in the same spot. I stopped checking after a while. It felt like feeding something, a kind of mental loop I didn't want to fall into. We made camp the next night on a rocky ledge farther north, higher up, less forest cover. The fire was out of sight now, blocked by terrain. That helped, at least for a while, but the silence followed us. Usually in the backcountry, there's ambient sound, wind, owls, bugs, creaking, trunks. But it felt like the woods were holding their breath. Even the creek nearby seemed quieter than it should have been. Will said he heard crunching outside the tent around 3 a.m. Not walking, just pressure on the needles. A footstep that never finished. He didn't get up. Neither did I. By morning, the silence was louder than anything. The final stretch of trail was narrow and barely marked, more animal path than human. We moved fast, barely stopping to eat. Every downed tree felt deliberate. Every squirrel scatter made me jump. We reached the trailhead by late afternoon. Just a gravel lot and a rusted sign marking the old fire route. No other cars, no signs of recent hikers. Nothing to explain what we'd seen, except one thing. Nailed to the backside of the signpost where the metal bent slightly from rust was a scrap of wood. Thin, almost whittled, burned around the edges. A carving, rough but clear. 2 tents. 1 fire. I didn't say anything, just stared at it while Will tossed his gear in the trunk. The drive back was quiet. We haven't really talked about it since. A month later, I was reorganizing gear in the garage, shaking out the tent, cleaning. The cook said. I unzipped the main compartment of my pack and found something I hadn't put there. A single piece of dry kindling, split neatly, smelled faintly of smoke. I tossed it. But every now and then, when I look out over the tree line from my apartment window, I swear I catch a flicker of firelight deep in the trees. Low, steady, like someone's still sitting there, still watching and still waiting for me to wave back. I was the one who suggested McDowell County. I'd seen an old topo map online that showed a valley not far off Route 16, just below the ridgeline near a place called Pine Creek Hollow. No campsites, no markers, just a sloped draw where a seasonal creek used to run. I figured it'd be quiet, out of the way. a little pocket of the Appalachians that most folks skipped over. Will liked the idea. He needed to get out of the house, said the walls had started feeling too close. I didn't press. We both carried things we didn't talk about. We parked off a gravel access road and hiked in around 2 miles. The trail was barely a trail, just worn down earth and the ghost of tire ruts that hadn't seen use in years. The deeper we got, the more it felt like the valley swallowed sound. Our boots scuffed wet leaves and decaying pine needles, but the noise felt hushed. Not muffled, just absorbed. By the time we reached the creek bed, I knew we were far from anything. The channel was dry, but the earth was still dark, like it remembered the water. Old sycamore roots clawed at the bank edges, and stone shelves jutted up from the ground like ribs. We set up camp on a flat patch just above the bed, a few yards from where the creek curled into a natural basin. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt loaded, heavy. We built a fire, ate quietly. The trees above us were bare, their branches skeletal and black against the gray sky. Fog settled in from the east as the sun dropped. It clung to everything. Our packs, the tent, even the rocks. When I went to zip the tent closed for the night, the sound of the zipper seemed louder than it should have been. That's when we heard it. A zipper. Not mine. Not Will's. Just a little off. A half-second late. From somewhere down past the fire pit, near the basin, Will looked at me. That was, I know, I said. We waited. Nothing else came. Just the crackle of our fire and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Maybe 5 minutes later, Will cleared his throat. A soft sound, unintentional. Then, somewhere down the draw, the same cough, almost identical, just a little too slow. That's when I realized what had felt wrong since we'd arrived. Sound didn't behave right here. Every small noise we made, cough, zip, even laughter, came back to us. But not as echoes, as copies, too perfect, just late enough to feel intentional. We tested it, Will laughed. Once, short. A beat passed, then, low in the woods, another single laugh. His exact laugh, but it had no warmth in it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every rustle I made came back to me, from somewhere just out of sight. The morning fog was thicker than before, curling between the trees like smoke. The fire had burned down to black ash, and our breath hung in the air even after sunrise. Will sat cross-legged just outside the tent, staring toward the basin. He hadn't said much. I stepped down to the creek bed, kicking at the dirt. The air smelled sour, wet leaves, rot, something else I couldn't place, like metal and sweat. That's when I noticed it, bare footprints, dozens of them, scattered but careful, too clean to be old, too spaced to be panicked. They weren't ours. I followed them a few steps, but they just stopped, right in the middle of the dried channel. No scuffs, no drag marks, just ended. We broke camp faster than usual. Neither of us said it out loud, but we didn't want to be there when night came again. As we packed, Will pulled something from the tent's mesh pocket. A torn scrap of notebook paper. I hadn't put it there, he hadn't either. On it, in faint pencil, "Don't speak first." That's all it said. Will folded it and tucked it into his jacket like it was fragile. His hands were shaking. We hiked, out in silence, listening with every step. About a mile up, I cleared my throat. Just reflex. A few moments later, just before the wind picked up, I swear I heard the same cough again, but farther off now, still following. We made it back to the truck by early afternoon. The cab smelled like dust and leather, and something vaguely sweet, familiar. I didn't realize until I got home that my boots still carried the creek bed dirt. Damp, black. It clung like oil. A week later, Will texted me something short. "Do you hear yourself sometimes? But not really?" That was the last message he sent. It's been months now. I've tried to move on. Tell myself it was acoustics, terrain, a weird quirk of the valley. But some nights, especially when the world is still, I'll cough or laugh or clear my throat, and I'll hear it again. The answer? Just a little too late, and never from the same place twice. I've never been one to ignore signs, at least not the obvious ones. But that trip, everything felt like it was already unraveling, quietly, without asking. Will had just gone through a divorce, and I'd been back on anxiety meds after a panic episode at work. The trail was supposed to help, long walks and short conversations, something to break the pattern. We started out from the Nantahala stretch late October. Weather was cold but dry. Leaves had already dropped, carpeting the trail in a rust-red layer that muffled every footstep. We'd hit marker 110 by the third evening and planned to stop just shy of 117 the next night. That morning, at a ranger checkpoint near an old road crossing, a guy in a brown parka flagged us down. Older man, thin voice. "Don't camp past 117, he said flatly. "The fire line's unstable. Still pockets of soot gas, bad footing. Wind carries weird out there." Will and I exchanged a look. "We're not idiots," he told him. "We'll be smart about it." The ranger didn't argue, just nodded once, eyes fixed on the woods behind us. Still, that stretch holds sound in ways it shouldn't. By dusk, we'd reached it. The fire line was obvious. The trees beyond 117 were scorched and brittle, black trunks stripped bare, bark like old charcoal. No underbrush, no color, just a gray slope dropping away from the trail. But there was a clearing just off to the left, a small flat patch surrounded by stunted trees that hadn't burned all the way through. We were ahead of schedule. The sky looked clear. It felt harmless, so we pitched the tent. The quiet hit harder that night. No crickets, no wind, just the crackle of a small fire and the occasional hiss from the coals when a pine needle dropped in. I remember zipping the tent closed and noticing how loud it sounded. Not echoing, just sharp. The kind of sharp you feel in your teeth. Will fell asleep fast. I lay awake, eyes open, listening to the forest hold its breath. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, a whistle, low, tuneless, just 3 notes, slurred and wandering. It came from down the slope, maybe 30 yards out. Then it stopped, held still, thinking maybe it was just air through a hollow limb. But then, after a pause, I heard another whistle, same pattern. But this one came from behind us. Uphill, farther off. Almost like an answer. I sat up slowly. Will shifted in his bag but didn't wake. The first whistle came again. Then the second. A call and response, back and forth, always with a pause in between. It stopped when I moved. If I shifted, even slightly, the whistling went quiet, like it knew I was listening. And in that thick silence, the thing that got me wasn't the sound itself. It was the rhythm, the patience, like 2 people trying to find each other without words. I woke Will around 2:30. He was groggy, annoyed until he heard it too. We sat there not speaking, just listening. Whistle from below, whistle from above, back and forth. I clicked off my headlamp. The light made it worse. Somehow, darkness felt safer, like I could disappear if I needed to. Will whispered, "What if it's just other hikers?" I shook my head. Nobody sets up after midnight on a burn ridge. Besides, the spacing was too perfect, the tone too deliberate. They weren't looking for a trail. They were tracking something, or someone. Around 3 a.m., I stepped out of the tent to check the perimeter. Frost had settled on the edges of the leaves. My breath came out in tight clouds. I walked a slow arc around our camp, boots crunching quiet, on the dead needles. I didn't go far, just enough to feel stupid and exposed. That's when I found the ring of stones, small palm-sized rocks placed in a perfect circle, maybe 20 feet from our tent. Inside the circle were 2 boot prints, not fresh, but not old, and they were mine, exact tread, same size. But I hadn't walked there. I hadn't stood in that spot. I looked back toward camp and realized the circle had a perfect line of sight to our tent. Not obscured, not accidental. Like whoever stood there wanted to see how we slept. When I got back, Will looked pale. "It's closer now," he said. He was right. The calls had shifted, maybe 50 feet apart now. Below and above, still trading notes, still waiting. We didn't sleep again. At dawn, we packed fast, skipped breakfast, skipped the trail. We cut straight downhill, off path, until we hit a side road that led into a forgotten town called Elmore's Gap. Population maybe 6. No cell service. Just a gas station with a payphone and a single flickering Coke machine. We didn't talk about the whistles on the drive back, but weeks later, Will mailed me something. No note, just a Ziploc bag. Inside, a pine needle, burnt on one end, and a small flat stone. On the underside of the stone, in faint graphite, were 3 little lines, slurred together, almost like a notation or a song fragment. I keep it in my drawer now. Sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I think I hear something outside the window. Not a voice, not a knock, just a faint whistle from one side of the street, then another. We were 2 days into a long trail loop south of War, West Virginia, somewhere off one of the lesser-used feeder paths from the Appalachian backcountry. No cell service, no markers for the last 5 miles, just ridgelines, thick laurel tunnels, and the kind of silence that builds in your ears after too much solitude. We'd meant to push farther that day, but a storm was pulling in. You could feel it in the pressure shift, low-hanging clouds clinging to the slope and the smell of wet bark getting sharper with every gust. That's when we found the tarp. It was already rigged between 3 trees just past a bend in the trail, half hidden behind a row of old boulders. Weathered green canvas, stiff with age, sagging in the middle. Somebody had clearly used it before. Probably hunters, we figured, or maybe an off-grid bushcrafter. The kind of person who left their setup in place to come back to. Will tugged on one of the lines. Still taut. "Better than pitching in the rain," he said. I didn't argue. My legs were jelly and my socks had gone damp an hour ago. The site itself was oddly clean. No wrappers, no bones, no tools. Just a half-dug fire pit with ash long cold, a rectangle of compacted earth beneath the tarp, and a few stacked stones like someone had once tried to make a windbreak. We got the tent up in minutes, right under the edge of the tarp. As the first drizzle started, it felt like a win. But the smell came with the dark, not all at once. More like something you don't notice until it's already in your nose. Wet animal fur, mold, something sour and metallic, beneath it all. I chalked it up to the earth. Old tarp, damp ground. Maybe something died nearby and got buried by weather. I mentioned it. Will just nodded. He was already half asleep, zipped into his bag. It was hard to rest. The smell sat in my throat, made my eyes water. I kept waking up, thinking I heard soft shifting outside the tent, like fabric rubbing on itself. But every time I unzipped the flap, the woods looked the same. Still, silent, heavy with fog and drizzle. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I saw a shape move behind the tarp wall, just a blur of shadow bending the canvas, but it didn't press close, it just paused, then slipped away. I told myself it was the wind, that the rope had loosened, that I was just tired. We made it till morning. The rain had stopped just before dawn, but the fog stayed thick. Everything felt soggy, boots, sleeves, even my thoughts. We packed slowly. Neither of us said much. I went to fold the tarp, thinking maybe I'd bring it back for a friend who did solo trips. That's when I saw the stains. Dark brown-black smears in the dirt, soaked deep into the ground beneath where our tent had sat. Not fresh, but not old either. There was a thickness to it, like oil slicked into clay. Will crouched beside me, rubbing at it with a stick. It flaked a little, then turned darker where the dew hit. "That's blood," he said quietly. I didn't reply. We lifted the tarp edge to shake it out, and that's when something slid loose from the seam where the fabric had been tucked around a tree limb. A Polaroid. Faded, yellowed around the edges, but the image was still clear enough. It was a photo of a man, sleeping, in a tent. Our tent. Same color, same layout. Same small rip in the corner from when Will snagged it on a branch the week before. The timestamp in the corner was dated 2 nights ago. Not the night we just had. The night before that. I turned the photo over. Nothing written. Just the grainy feel of old paper and a faint curve like it had been kept pressed between heavy things. Will said nothing. Just stood, shouldering his pack like he wanted to be gone 10 minutes ago. I left the tarp where it was. We hiked hard that day. No breaks. Just steady footfalls and the slap of branches against our legs. We didn't camp again, not really. Slept in shifts by a creek turnout close to a back road and left as soon as the sun cut through the trees. A week later, I went through my gear in the garage. The photo was gone. I hadn't kept it. At least I didn't think I had. But now I wasn't sure. Then I found something tucked into the mesh side pouch of my pack. Another Polaroid. Same man, same tent. But now he was sitting up. Blurred. Like he just turned his head before the flash. That tent wasn't in the photo anymore. But our boots were. Mine. Will's. Side by side. By the entrance flap. I didn't tell Will. I figured he'd already seen. His I still have mine. I don't show it to people. Not because I'm scared of it, though maybe I am. But because there's something worse than being watched in your sleep. It's realizing you weren't supposed to find out. That whatever took the first picture, it's not done yet. There were 3 of us on that trip, me, Tyler, and Bree. We'd been doing a section hike through a quieter stretch of the Monongahela, just west of the Cranberry Wilderness. Mid-autumn, fewer people, no cell towers. Everything felt still and forgotten. On the 3rd night, we found a spot near a rock outcrop, high enough to overlook the hollow below, low enough to block the wind. The kind of place you just settle into without talking much about it. The stone shelf jutted out of the ridgeline like a cracked tooth. Underneath it, soft pine needles, a ring of old firestone, some overgrown brush. Someone had camped here before, years ago by the look of it. There were no obvious paths in or out, just a quiet patch carved into the woods. Tyler set up the tent, while Bree cleared the pit. I sat on the rock edge, staring down into the tree line. The forest below looked like it had folded in on itself, dense, shadowy, no movement. The kind of quiet that starts to feel personal. After dark, we kept the lantern going while we ate. Crackers, peanut butter, some old trail mix. It was chilly, but manageable. There wasn't much talking. Everyone was tired. Around 10, we turned. The lantern off. That's when we heard it, whispering, just beyond the fire pit. Down where the light had faded into shadow. It wasn't words, more like tones. Urgent, hushed. One voice first, then another responding. Then 2 more overlapping in a way that felt too structured to be the wind. Tyler clicked the lantern back on. Silence. It cut off clean. No rustling, no movement. Just the sound of the trees creaking under their own weight. We laughed it off, kind of. The way people do when they're not ready to admit something feels wrong. But it happened again. Every time we turned the light off, it started. Just outside the circle of darkness. A conversation we couldn't quite join. Sometimes it felt angry. Sometimes panicked. Always layered like a room full of people trying not to be heard. We tested it, turned the light off, counted to 20. On again. Off. On, always the same result. The voices never came closer, but they never moved away either. Around midnight, Bree pulled out her field recorder. She used it sometimes for nature sounds, birds mostly. She clipped it to one of the poles and hit record, just to see if we were crazy. We left it running and crawled into the tent, none of us saying much. I didn't sleep that night. Morning hit cold and wet. Mist clung to the trees like cobwebs. Everything felt too quiet. Bree grabbed the recorder first thing, thumbed through the file, and played back a section while Tyler boiled water. The first 10 minutes were just night sounds. wind in the needles, distant owl, our fire crackling. Then it started. Voices. Clearer than we expected. 4 of them. Not wind, not trees. 4 separate tones. Low, tight. 1 clipped, 1 muttering. 1 with a sort of rasp. The 4th. Softer but insistent. We listened in total silence. None of us moved. The strangest part wasn't what they were saying. It's that we still couldn't make out the actual words. Just the cadence, the tension. They sounded close, like they were just outside the mic's range, like they knew how far they could go without fully being caught. Tyler scrubbed the file forward. Same thing. Same voices. Same distance. Same hush. Then Bree pointed something out. At one point, the raspy voice says something sharper, more forceful, and just as it finishes, one of our voices comes in. Mine, mumbling in my sleep. You could barely hear it. But it's unmistakable. They weren't just whispering near us. They were whispering around us. At some point while I was asleep, they had circled the tent. Tyler shut off the recorder. We left camp less than 30 minutes later. Didn't even eat. Just packed fast and hit the ridge trail without speaking. The woods felt wrong that morning. The fog moved too slow. The birds didn't come back. When we reached the trailhead late that night, none of us looked back. I still have the audio file. Bree sent it to me a week later with no message, just a wave attachment and a subject line that said, "Listen with headphones." I never responded. Sometimes I play it again, just to make sure I didn't imagine it, that I wasn't just overtired, or paranoid, or letting the dark mess with me. But every time I count the voices, 4, clear as day, even though we were only 3 people on that trip, and in the last 10 seconds of the file, if you turn it up all the way, there's a sound that shouldn't be there, just a scrape of nylon, the kind a tent makes when someone brushes their hand down the side, from the outside. There were 3 of us on that trip, me, Mason, and Luke. We'd been talking about a proper woods weekend for years, but it kept getting pushed. Life, jobs, marriages, all that. When it finally happened, it was late October, already flirting, with frost at night. We picked a spot near Renwick, West Virginia. Luke knew the area, said his uncle used to hunt out there. No trail markers. Just a rough pull-off on a gravel road that dropped into a pine valley. We brought 1 extra chair. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. I packed mine. Mason had his. Luke grabbed an old collapsible one from his shed, one of those sagging nylon kinds with the mesh cup holder. Said something like, "Just in case someone joins us." We all laughed. The hike in wasn't long, maybe 2 hours, mostly downhill. We found a clearing not far from a trickling creek bed, ringed by old sycamores and the kind of quiet you can't find near pavement. The dirt was soft, pine needles thick underfoot, and the whole valley had this hushed feel, like even the birds kept low voices. We set up camp. Fire ring, tents, chairs. 3 set in a half circle near the pit. The 4th, Luke's spare, remained folded by a tree. The first night was calm, cold, but nothing unusual. We ate like kings, foil packs of beans and potatoes, beef jerky, a few cans of cheap beer. Mason played music from his phone until the battery died. We passed around a flask. It felt good to be out there. Next morning, I stepped out of the tent to take a leak and stopped cold. The extra chair was open. Not just open, unfolded and placed by the fire, perfectly lined up with ours, facing the woods. I thought maybe Luke had done it, or Mason messing around, but neither of them remembered moving it. We joked about it, called it the ghost chair. Nobody seemed too bothered. It was just weird. But then it happened again. Second night, we made a point to fold the chair and lean it behind the fire ring. By morning, it was back out. Same position, same angle. Facing the tree line. The ground was too dry for prints. I checked. Still, it felt like something was off. That kind of silent, low hum you get in your bones when you know you're being watched. None of us said it aloud. By that afternoon, even the squirrels had gone quiet. On the third day, the mood shifted. We weren't laughing as much. Conversations started, then trailed off. I caught Luke staring out into the trees a few times, just watching. Not scanning, watching like he was waiting for something to move. That night, we kept the fire going late. Nobody wanted to say it, but none of us felt like crawling into the tents. The fourth chair sat in its now usual spot, about 5 feet from the fire, angled slightly toward the trees. There was a chill in the air, and it wasn't just the weather. We ended up sleeping in shifts, not officially, but we took turns tending the fire. Around 4 a.m., I dozed off in my chair. When I woke up, the fire was down to red ash. The woods were still black, and the chair was empty. I don't mean someone had been sitting in it. I mean it felt recently empty, like someone had just stood up and walked off. That was the last night. By morning, the mood had bottomed out. We packed, quietly. I folded the fourth chair and stowed it in my pack. Luke asked why I brought it. I told him I didn't want to leave it there. That's when Mason called us over. He was pointing at the ground, just in front of where the chair had been. Boot prints, 2 of them, deep, fresh. Heel dug in, toes pointed toward the fire, like someone had stood there facing us. Only problem? None of us wore boots. Luke had trail runners. Mason wore old Asics. I had my Merrill mids, worn flat, all smooth-soled. These prints were different, heavy, lugged, deep tread, recent enough to hold detail. We didn't speak on the hike out. It felt like we weren't supposed to. That was 6 months ago. We haven't gone back. I still have that chair. It sits in my garage, folded, tucked behind an old cooler. I haven't touched it since, but sometimes when the house is too still, I swear I hear the click of nylon unfolding. And last week when I went to grab a tarp, the chair had shifted. It was out in the open, facing the garage door, and the dirt floor beneath it had 2 clean depressions. Not footprints this time, just the shape of them, like weight had been there, and then wasn't. I've done a lot of hiking through Pisgah, not the scenic overlooks or waterfall trails you find on postcards. I mean the deep cuts. Off the Blue Ridge Parkway, down old CCC paths where moss grows over metal blazes and even deer hesitate to pass. That weekend, it was just me and Darren. We'd done Linville Gorge the year before, and this was supposed to be quieter. He had a print map. I had my GPS watch. Neither of us were green. We were aiming for a 3-day loop along the West Ridge, just under the tree line. Solid route. But somewhere past midday, we came across a narrow side trail that shouldn't have been there. It curved between 2 moss-slicked boulders, down into a thicket that looked barely passable. But the tread was unmistakable. Worn, used. Darren pointed at it. "Doesn't show on mine," he said. I checked my GPS. Nothing. But the path looked real, and the idea of seeing something not on the map, that got under our skin. It felt like an opportunity, like the kind of place few people still found. So we followed it. It dropped fast, steep uneven switchbacks down into a hollow that neither of us could find a name for later. No blazes, no trail markers, just pine needles and rockfall, damp earth and the occasional animal scat, though we never heard anything. No birds, no rustle. Even our voices felt smaller somehow, like they were being swallowed as soon as they left our mouths. That's what hit me first, the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was complete. When I stepped, my boot didn't crunch or scrape. It landed like it had weight but no sound, like I was dreaming the hike instead of taking it. 2 hours in, we were deep enough that turning back would have eaten daylight. So we kept going. Right before sunset, we found the pit. A cleared circle of ash and soot tucked against a low rock wall. No smoke, but when I knelt beside it, I could still feel heat rising off the stones. Someone had used it recently. Very recently. No trash, no gear, no signs of where they'd gone. Darren was checking the tree line when we heard the first step. Crunch, from the ridge just above us. A single footfall, dry and deliberate. We both looked up. Nothing there. Just trees. And a shape. At first I thought it was a tree trunk, but it wasn't. It was a figure, maybe 5 feet tall, made entirely of stacked stones. Balanced perfectly. Arms, legs, a head. No mortar, no wire, just weight and precision. It stood facing us, perfectly still. We didn't speak, we just stared, waiting for it to move. It didn't. Eventually we turned back toward camp, but neither of us really slept. We left at first light. The plan was to retrace our path out, get back up to the last mapped trail and loop toward the car. But the way back didn't look the same. I mean that literally. The slope didn't match. The boulders were wrong. Trees. I was sure I'd passed the day before were missing or facing the wrong direction. No signal, no trails, just silence. It's hard to explain how disorienting sound can be when it's missing. You don't realize how much your body depends on small cues, gravel shifts, birdsong, wind through branches. Without it, everything feels suspended. We kept climbing, trying to gain elevation, hoping for a signal or a break in the canopy. That's when we found the second figure. Another stone person, this one larger. 7 feet tall, maybe. Its arms stretched out like it was blocking a path. Just standing in the middle of a narrow cut in the trees. No one builds those on accident. It would have taken time, effort, and both of them, this one and the one from the night before, were facing downhill. Toward the hollow. Toward us. Darren wanted to push past it. Said it was probably some artist or backwoods survivalist project, but something in me didn't want to touch it. We skirted around, up and over a ridge that left our legs burning. The higher we got, the more everything blurred. Not just the trail, us. I was losing track of time. How long we'd been walking. Whether we'd eaten. What day it was. I kept checking my watch only to forget what it said as soon as I looked away. That night we didn't find a campsite. We just collapsed on a patch of flat moss under a leaning pine. And in the middle of the night I woke up to breathing, not an animal, not snoring. It was rhythmic, calm, close. I lay there, frozen. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. Like someone was sitting 5 feet from my bag, watching. In the morning, Darren was pale and tight-lipped. I didn't ask if he heard it too. I didn't want confirmation. We moved faster after that. Found a rusted fence line. Then a logging road. Then, finally, a marker nailed to a tree, aged to gray but still visible. 2 days later, we were out. But here's the thing. When I was unpacking at home, I found something in the bottom of my bag. A rock. Flat, dark, smooth. About the size of a slice of bread. But it had been etched. 3 small lines. Like legs. 2 longer ones. Like arms. And a circle for a head. I didn't put it there. Neither did Darren. And I still haven't thrown it away. I don't know why. But sometimes when the world goes quiet, I swear I feel that weight again. Like something balanced behind me. Waiting.